All right, we are in Daniel chapter 2. Hopefully, you have picked up the notes if you are those type of people. If you don't like notes, you do not hurt my feelings at all. If you haven't, there's some in the back. There was a stapled bunch of copies, and then you get the cool coloring statue there that you have kids, they might just want to color the statue. I don't know. That we'll talk about that a little bit later. If you missed the first week and you would like the first week notes, or the flow chart, or the chronological order. We gave out a lot of stuff last week. Those are also in the back. You can grab those at the end if you would like those. And we'll kind of help you fill in the flow chart at the end. And so if you remember a little synopsis here of Daniel. We won't do this every week, but remember the book of Daniel is written by a guy named Very good, very good. You would say you guys are halfway there. You guys should be seminary students. Written by a guy named Daniel. Daniel is a Jew, he's a Hebrew, and he was taken into slavery by the king Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar was the Babylonian king, came in and took over the southern part of Israel, defeated Jerusalem, took Jerusalem, and then in 3 or 4 waves took people back to Babylon. But Daniel and his friends, we'll read some of his friends, but a small group of the best, right? They were the smartest, the best looking, the creme of the creme. They were the top. They went back first, and the king Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, put them through college. Babylonian college, and so he put them up in the best dorms, had the best food. They got to eat all the food that the king ate, all the wine that the king drunk. But Daniel and his 3 friends did not want to do that. Remember, it was against the Jewish laws. It was not what God wanted for them, and so they went on a vegetarian diet. And the most important takeaway was, you guys remember what happened after a week's worth of eating vegetables? They got No, the Bible says they got fat, okay? They got fat. So eating vegetables makes you fat, all right? So stick with the cheeseburgers, all right? It's biblical, I'm just telling you, Daniel 1. And so they were more healthy, they were fatter than the other boys, so they got to continue on their diet. And basically, in chapter 1, we get a synopsis of their college years, their 3 years in college. And afterwards, Daniel and his 3 friends, these Jewish kids, were the best of the best. Okay, that's kind of synopsis chapter 1. Chapter 2 that we'll be looking at tonight, we probably will not get all the way through chapter 2, but we will definitely make our way through most of it. Chapter 2 is we're actually going back. Chapter 1 is kind of a synopsis of 3 or 4 years going on there. Chapter 2, we go back just a year. This is the senior year. This is the graduating year of Daniel and his friends as they're in this kind of college, this Babylonian college. And so we kind of get the synopsis in 1, 2. He takes us back to this event. And so we can start going through notes. I said last week, if you weren't here, these are kind of like my notes as I study, so they're not fill in the blank. There could be typos. Literally, I just Control-P and just print them off. So if they don't make sense, you can ask me about it, and I'll try to help flesh it out. Here we go. In the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, we're in chapter 2, verse 1. Sorry, I should have said that, of the book of Daniel. In the 2nd year, which is somewhere between 602 and 603 BC, just kind of help you catch in there, the senior year of Daniel's kind of Babylonian graduate course, the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left. Notice that dreams is plural, right? It has an S on it. It's not that he had one dream, he had a bunch of dreams, and it was through this long kind of spell of dreams that left him sleepless. And you can imagine, if you follow anything, anytime that you're in leadership, by definition, you lose sleep. Anytime you're responsible for anybody else, you lose sleep. That's part of being a leader. Doesn't matter what your political alliance goes into, but if you look at a picture of a president and you look at him 4 or 8 years later when he comes out, There's a noticeable difference, right? They're almost all white-haired and look like they aged like 20 in just 4 or 8 years. Because what? Because they're in leadership. So you can imagine a king, the biggest kind of world power going on at this time. There's some things to think about, right? You think about money, you think about power, you think about army, you think about everything that's happening, you think about countries trying to invade. And so there's a lot of kind of loss of sleep as a king. But this is more than normal, right? It's because of these dreams that troubled his spirit, and so his sleep has left him. Then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. Okay, so let's look at those words, because when we read those words in English, it's really not what they are. It's just kind of funny how things have changed in what they mean. But the word magician simply just means what we would say today a scribe. Somebody that would use and pen. As the king would talk in kind of ancient Near East, anytime the king said anything, somebody would write it down, and those went into scrolls. This is the reason why we have more history of Egypt than anybody else, because Pharaoh had more magicians, scribes, that literally anything that he ever said was recorded multiple times on multiple scrolls, and that's what we find today. That's why if you study world history in high school or in college, 90% of your class is going to be about Egypt, because we just simply have the most about them. So, of course, they take up a lot of the time. So magicians, don't think like abracadabra, poof, they pull a bunny, right? And think about a scribe. The enchanters, this is kind of this idea of connected with spirits. In our mind, we would say fortune tellers, somebody that would read your palm, these types of people. In our mind, we would kind of put this in today's language. If a magician is a scribe, an enchanter is kind of what we would say is a wizard today. Once again, they couldn't, the case is not a Harry Potter novel. They can't just poof, make things happen. But they were smart individuals, and they could do a lot of things. We can see this going back hundreds of years, almost 1,000 years before Daniel, when Moses was going against Pharaoh, and Moses turns the Nile into the Red Sea. What happens? The magicians do that. Moses throws down his staff and turns it to a cobra. His sorcerers, his enchanters, do the exact same. It's not because they had that power. They didn't have the power of God, but they were good at what we would call today sleight of hand. They understood, kind of diversion, those types of tactics. And so we have the magicians, the scribes, we have the enchanters, the wizards, who would kind of work with the spiritual world and fortune telling. Then we have the sorcerers. Today we would call them pharmacists or drug dealers. But sorcerers means cutting in Hebrew. It means to cut. So when you think about drugs, you think about pharmacists. My dad was a pharmacist for a big part of his life. And so you can imagine, if you've ever seen a pharmacist work, they have like a big bottle of medicine. They pour it out, and they take this little knife, and they cut them out, and that's how they count. So to cut drugs, to cut medicine, this is kind of that idea. Sorcerers cutting pharmaceutical. And then we have the word Chaldeans. If you were here last week, we talked about Chaldeans. Chaldeans, the word, simply means Babylonians. There are a few references throughout the Bible where this Chaldeans refers to a specific part of the Babylonian people. This is the Chaldeans, is the same word that we get from the Christmas story, Magi. Make sense? Oh, here we go. So they're just really smart, intelligent people, right? We would call them today astrologers. These are people that looked at the stars. They started the calendar time. They predicted things. Hey, I bet there's going to be a full moon in 28 and a half days. Look at that. I was right. Those are those type of people. So when the king is having a problem, he cannot sleep, there's lots of dreams, notice who he calls, right? He calls everybody. If the king has a problem, everybody has a problem, right? If your boss has a problem, you now have a problem. That's kind of how it works out. And so you can see he calls everybody. He calls the people that write, that know the laws, that know the rules because they've written them all. He calls the people who deal with the spiritual side, fortune-telling side. He calls the pharmacists and the drug dealers. And he also calls the astrologers, kind of what we would say today are the smartest people in the Babylonian Empire. So he literally calls everybody at his disposal to help him figure out this dream. So they came in and stood before the king. In verse 3, and the king said to them, I had a dream. He's not Martin Luther King. I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Verse 4, then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. Notice in verse 3, he said, I had a dream. What's different? It's singular, right? He's been having constant dreams. This is why he couldn't sleep. But now there's one dream. There's a particular, very singular dream. He says, I've had a dream, and this is trouble to know the dream. And so what's interesting about this is King Nebuchadnezzar is not asking them to interpret the dream. He says, I cannot sleep. There's one dream that's been bugging me. And they're like, okay, tell us what it is. We'll tell you, O great king. Anybody in this room could do that. Anybody in this room, I could say, I've had a dream, and if you tell me what it is, I'll give you $1 million. And they'd be like, well, tell me the dream, and I'll interpret it. I said, well, I had a dream, and it was about California raisins singing, I heard it through the grapevine. And then somebody that would want $1 million would come up with a grand story that would say, well, that's what that dream means. And I'll be like, well, hot dog, here's your $1 million. It's exactly, these are the smartest people in the Babylonian Empire. And so the king says, I have a problem. Sir, tell us what your problem is, and we'll be glad to tell you a reason out. It's the same if something breaks and you have to call the warranty center, right? It's the same thing. Yes, my Dell broke. Well, that's not under the warranty. Well, but it is under the warranty. Well, no, sir, because this. They'll explain every reason why it's not, okay? It's the exact same thing. But that's not what the king is asking. He says, my spirit is troubled to know the dream. He's called the four groups, the smartest people of Babylon, and he says this, I've had a terrible dream, and I need to know what it means now. Tell me what it means. No. You tell me what I dreamt, and you tell me the interpretation. Now, that's a lot harder to get $1 million from Sean, right? If I came in and said I give $1 million, somebody tell me what I dreamt last night and what it meant. Out of everybody in this room, because everybody would give it a shot for $1 million, nobody would have came up with California raisins going, I heard it through the grapevine, right? Nobody would have said that. Most of you have been like, it would have been about food, it would have been about, whatever. Y'all have made up something and just hurt my feelings. But that's what it was, right? But that's what the king wants. Tell me the dream and the interpretation. And then the Chaldeans said in king in Aramaic, remember what I told you? Chapter 1 is in Hebrew. Chapters 2 through 6 is in Aramaic. Chapter 7 through 12, the end of the book, is back in Hebrew. Okay, so in Aramaic, here's where we start. The book kind of changes if you're reading it in original language. And he says, oh, please just tell us what the dream is and we'll tell you. Verse 5, the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb to limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. Wow. He was kind of up the ante, right? So now the king says, listen, I really want to know. So tell me. And if you don't tell me, or if you guess wrong, you're going to be torn from limb to limb, and your house, which means your family, your wife, your kids, everything that you've ever thought about, your beautiful dog and your horrible cat, they're going to be dead too. We're going to kill them all. Okay, now we're kind of upping the ante. But before we go there, and I don't have it in these notes, but for some of you, I know that you love it. I was hoping Ed was here tonight because I was going to just rag on him a little bit. Ed's a King James Version guy. He loves that. And so we just love always just, if you find anything that, if you find a friend and they just always have something, right, you always got to kind of bug them about it. And I'm sure in this room there's a King James Version. In your King James Version Bible, where it says, the word from me is firm. In the King James Version, it says, this thing is gone from me. In all of the King James Version, we're not going to get into tonight, and all the other versions, there's never kind of the biggest opposite thing that could be said. So if you're reading a King James Version, it writes as if the king has kind of forgotten what his dream was. And so he needs them to tell it to him, and he'll be like, oh yeah, kind of help him to understand. In every other version of the Bible, and I would say the correct version, it was just saying the word from me is firm, and it's really how you decipher a couple words in Hebrew. Not going there, but if you are a King James Version fan, that's why maybe your version is different. Anyways, the word from me is firm, and if you do not make known, if you do not tell me the dream and interpretation, you're over, right? You and your whole family. Verse 6, but if you show the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and rewards in great honor. What's interesting about the word great honor, you would see it, we see it a lot in the Old Testament. We see it with Abraham, we see it with Isaac, especially kind of in the patriarch, that Genesis, Exodus timeline. We see it a lot. You know what great honor means? You get a smiley face on the top of your paper. Did you ever have a teacher that says, man, if you make a good deal on this test, you make a great grade, it's going to be great. It's going to boost you up. You're going to be great. It's going to be awesome. And then you make a good grade. The teacher says, attaboy. Are you kidding me? I wanted something more. And that's what's going on here. So the king is saying, whoever gets it right, okay, you're going to receive gifts and rewards, and you're going to get a great honor. But the great honor is really, you're the only person that's going to be left alive. So just consider that a blessing in disguise, right? That's kind of what it means. So, and we see this a lot in Genesis and Exodus. It's just kind of always a funny little quirky saying in the Bible. You're going to get a great honor. You don't really get anything. Therefore, show me a dream and its interpretation. And they answered, these four groups of people, right? The magicians, the enchanters, the sorcians, and the magi, the Chaldeans. They answered a second time, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show its interpretation. Right? Because they can't do it. They don't know what the guy has dreamt. Have you ever woke up from a dream and be like, that was the craziest thing I've ever dreamt in my life? Of course you have. And could you imagine going to your parents or to your friends or your coworkers, somebody, and be like, guess what I dreamt last night? I don't know, tell me. No, seriously, just guess. I mean, how long is lunch going to be? You're just like, are you kidding me? But that's what happens, right? And so for the second time, these brilliant guys, the sorcerers, magicians, please, O king, just tell us your dream, and we can tell you the interpretation. And the king answered and said, I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time, right? He knows what they're trying to do. You do not become the king of the known world and are a slacker. Okay, he's pretty smart himself. He understands. I know with certainty that his staff is trying to pull one over on him. Because you see that the word from me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. Be torn from limb to limb, and your whole house tore down, your kids, your dog, and your cat, they're killing them all. And I shall therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. And the Chaldeans answered the king and said, right? So now the Magi, the smartest of the smart, right? They answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demands. Excuse number one, right? There's nobody alive that can do this. For no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. Excuse number two. Number three, and the thing that the king asked is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh. Excuse number three. Gods don't dwell in flesh. Wow, ain't that funny? 600 more years, the God becomes flesh. It's kind of amazing, right? And so here, the king is saying, listen, I want to know the dream, I want to know interpretation. And they're like, sir, I don't want to say you're an idiot, but you can't do this. There's nobody that could have done this. Nobody knows this. There's just excuse and excuse and excuse. Have you ever noticed when somebody wants you to do something and you can't or you don't want to do it, what happens? Excuse after excuse after excuse, right? Somebody, whatever, wants to play pig and they beat you in pig, you know, there's an excuse, right? Oh, my arm, oh, my ankle, oh, you know, whatever. It happens, right? There's always excuses, right? That's what happens. Verse 12, because of this, the king was angry and furious. We see this word 2 other times all in the Bible, and there you have them in Genesis 40 and 41, but it's always talking about the wrath of the Pharaoh. So you can imagine how mad the Pharaoh was. We all know the story of Moses. He was pretty mad. And so here Nebuchadnezzar is very furious and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. So he realized at that point, right, after asking once, after twice, after 3 times, now excuse 1, excuse 2, excuse 3. Okay, all of you guys have been lying to me my whole life. You have no powers. You have no point. I'm just going to kill all of you. And so he ordered for all of them to be destroyed. Now, I know this doesn't mean a lot to us today, but imagine whatever president you want, okay? Just pick a president, okay? And this president saying, hey, I want this. And everybody's like, you can't have this. And that president instantly saying, okay, all of my cabinet, all of the Pentagon, all of my 5-star general, anybody and everybody, them and their family completely destroyed. Execute them all. How do you think that would go over? I'm just saying that would not be well. Okay, just wouldn't go good. Doesn't matter who your president is, right? But that's exactly what happens. Here's you have a king, and the king is the face of the government, right? He's the face of the country. But in reality, he's not the one that does everything. Right? It's everybody else. It's his cabinet members. It's his faculty around him that makes everything go. And so could you imagine if a president came and said, all right, all the transportation members, they're gone, all of the housing, all of the medical, just kill them all, execute them all and their families. Could you imagine what something would be like tomorrow? I mean, what would happen? I mean, you couldn't even imagine what would happen. That's exactly what happens. The king is totally fed up and decides to kill everybody that works for him. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them, right? Because Daniel and his 3 friends, right, they're there, okay? But remember, they're seniors. They haven't graduated yet. Last week, we talked about how they were graduated, and they were so smart, they were better, and Nebuchadnezzar appoints them as number 1, okay? But now we're a year before that. They haven't got to prove what they're worth. They haven't really got to do anything. All we know is they eat vegetables and they get fat. Okay? It's terrible. It's terrible. It's terrible. But that's what happens, right? So no salads, right? Chicken fingers and fries. That's the new diet. And so that's what we know. Okay? That's what's going on. And so now Daniel and his classmates, they're sitting in their dorm. They're studying for a test. They're doing everything together. And all of a sudden their door is kicked in. And now there's a guy and he says, hey, we got to kill you. Do I get a reason? Can I help you? Like, what's going on? So the decree went out, and then Daniel's companions to kill him. Daniel replied with prudence and discretion. Right? He was nice. Okay? Somebody's trying to kill you. I'm just saying, nice will go a long way. Okay? Try to be nice. The captain of the king's guard who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree of the king so urgent? Okay? They don't know what's happening. Remember, the king had a dream. He summoned everybody. Tell me the dream. Tell me the interpretation. We can't. Tell me, can't. All of you are going to die. Okay, so we're just within a few hours. This hasn't made the news yet. Okay, and so why is this so urgent? Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel. He goes through and explains everything that happened. And Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to king. Okay, so notice this, right? So Daniel hears this, everything that happened. The king's had a dream. He needs to know the dream and the interpretation, and nobody can do it, so he's killing all of the wise men. And that includes you who are studying to be one day one of the wise men. And Daniel's like, I got a better idea. Give me a time. Give me some time. Give me a future date, and I will be able to do it. I'll tell you. If you remember in chapter 1, right? Remember in chapter 1, they not only did they eat vegetables and get fat, but God gave them wisdom, gave them education. They were able to study and to learn and to do all that. But in a part of that, Daniel got a special gift, a special blessing to interpret dreams. Now, we don't know if before this that he's, doing it for his friends, if he just realizes he has this gift, but for some point at his senior year, he realizes that there's a problem and he has the solution. And his solution is not necessarily him, but it's God and the gift that God's given to him. So he cries to Arioch, this soldier, this captain that's trying to kill him. He says, please go back to the king and say, give me a little bit of time, and I'll be able to answer his question. Okay? So a point in time that he might show the interpretation to the king. Verse 17, then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, and told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men in Babylon. Okay? So Daniel, he has this confrontation, right? And says, please don't, give me a date. Okay, it happened. And then he goes right back to his three closest friends. These three boys are friends from Jerusalem with Daniel. They're a part of the slavery that's been taken. They're in school with him. They understand this. And he says, okay, guys, I just made a bad deal. Here's what happened. Okay, we're going to die. But if we can interpret the dream, we're going to live. Okay? Okay, how many of you like to have that? Could you imagine your kid busting into your house, or somebody, your friend, busting in your dorm room and saying, okay, something just happened, but we're all going to die. That's just never a great way to kind of start out the day, right? You don't really want to hear those words, but that's exactly what happens. And he told them to seek mercy from God in heaven concerning this mystery. That word is raz in Aramaic. Okay, remember, we're reading in Aramaic now. It's raz, and this is talking about this divine strategy. In the New Testament, this word is mysterios, and Paul uses it all the time. And it's just talking about something that's in the past that becomes known in the future. Kind of like the Revelation, apocalypse, right? The word we talked about this morning. So concerning this mystery, so that Daniel's companions might not be destroyed with the rest of them. But notice what Daniel said to them. This is very important. He did not tell his friends to go home and pray for the answer. Okay? That's not what he said. He went home to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah's companions and told them to seek mercy from God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed. He says, hey, you guys start praying that we don't get murdered. Right? He didn't ask for them to pray for the answer. Daniel knew that was up to God. Okay? Daniel knew that was an all God thing. He didn't need them praying for that. He told them to seek mercy from God that they would be able to live. Verse 19, then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Now, we don't know the timeline. Okay? We don't know if it was a day, a week, a month. Okay? It was less than a year. We do know that. But we don't know exactly the timeline. But the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. When you think vision, you can in my mind, it's the word dream. Okay? Now, is that technically theologically correct? Well, not really. Okay? Because dreams, you don't know, if they're real or not. Right? You wake up, was I dreaming that? I mean, it's a weird place, right? But there is enough in a dream that it's very detailed. You have conversation, things happening. But because God is involved, when you wake up, you know that was from God. Okay, so in my mind, it's a dream with a little bit more affirmation from God. But kind of whatever you want to think about what a vision is, totally fine. There's a vision in the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. So when he woke up, he already knew that God gave him the answer, and he prayed and thanked God for that answer. And Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever. Okay, the name of God, that phrase, you see it all throughout the Old Testament. It's basically it's saying the name of God without saying it. Remember, Jews could not say Yahweh. They could not write Yahweh. They could not write the name of God because it was so holy. They could not say it, write it, read it, couldn't do anything, right? So the name of God is just kind of a little subset off of Yahweh. Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things, and he knows what is in the darkness, and that the light dwells with him. If you notice in that, because we're seeing his prayer, right? We're seeing what he's praying. But just notice kind of the highlighted word, the underlined words there, right? Blessed be the name of God. He changes, he removes, he gives, he reveals, he knows. Right? These are all words that shows that God possesses infinite wisdom and that he is sovereign over all things. So Daniel knows his place. It's not like Daniel has this interpretation. He doesn't have this dream, and now he's saying, I'm the best guy in all the world because I'm the only guy who can do this, right? It's all to God, and he's giving God kind of that thank you of doing that. To you, O God, verse 23, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, right? Thanksgiving is always a part of prayer. For you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you. Notice that word we, right? I mean, if we got to be honest, right? The star of the book of Daniel is Daniel, right? I mean, we know the other guys because of VeggieTales, right? We know them because they were in the furnace. We know them, we know these things, but Daniel is the star. But notice what Daniel says. Thank you, God, so that our prayers, all of our prayers, not just me, not just elevating Daniel, but man, thank you so much for Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Thank you for their prayers that we will live because you've given us this dream. You've given us this vision. And so we asked of you, for you have made known to the king's matter. Verse 24, therefore Daniel went into Arioch, that was the general, the captain of the killing team, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. And he went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. All right? He's like, hold up, stop. Okay, we got the answer. Please don't kill anybody. Bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation. And Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus to him, I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who will make known to the king the interpretation. You guys see something there? It's called a politician. Okay? Right? You have this captain, this pointed captain of the killing squad, right? The death team. And he comes in. And now Daniel has the interpretation. Daniel told him not to kill anybody. Daniel told him to give them some time. He's done all this. Now God has given the vision. He goes and says, I have the vision. Set me before the king. And Arioch goes in for the king and says, Dear king, I have found the one guy in the world. Look how great I am. Such a politician, right? Oh, kills me. I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who will make known the interpretation. And the king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar. Remember, their name got changed last week in chapter 1. Are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen in interpretation? And Daniel answered the king and said, no wise man or enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what will be in his latter days. Notice the difference, right? Arioch says, I have found the one guy who can answer this. The king says, young man, is that right? And Daniel's like, well, you know what? I mean, really, there's nobody in the world that can do this. But luckily, there is a God who's above all other gods. And he's done it. He knows it. He's interpreted it. And he's told me, so I can tell you, right? So you have Arioch, you have the politician, it's all about him. And then you have Daniel, who it's all about God. And he says, he has made known, king, that what will be in the latter days. In your dream, the visions will be, if your head will lay in your bed. Notice that word latter days. It's a cool word in the Old Testament. Today, it's what churches, I think, spend a lot of time on, right? Word latter days, we would call that second coming, past tribulation, 1,000-year reign, the millennium. It was kind of this idea. So in Old Testament, 14 times is talking about prophetically in the future. Remember, we said last week about Daniel? Daniel, reading the book of Daniel is like an older person. I'm just going to say an older person because I don't think I'm young and I don't wear them. but it's a person with transitional glasses, right? Kids, if you don't know what that is, it's bifocals or trifocals for the really old, right? So you have that, right? They're glasses, and here at the bottom, you can see really close. They can read. You look up, you can have a conversation, and then if you look through the top, you can be like, oh, I can read that license plate far away. That's the book of Daniel. As we're reading Daniel, some things about Daniel is happening right there in time with Daniel. Then there's some things in the mid-level that's happening 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 years later. And then there's other things that he's seeing from the top line of his glasses that are thousands of years in advance than we are, right? When Jesus comes back the second time. And so that word latter days is an Old Testament word talking about the second coming, right? The book of Revelation at the end, right? So, yeah. Okay, any questions on that before I go? All right, we'll keep on going. Description of the statue. All right, verse 29. To you, O king, as you lay in your bed at night, come thoughts of what be after this. And he who reveals mysteries may know to you what is to be. Notice again, Daniel's saying it's all about God, right? He who reveals the mysteries. This is not Daniel. This is all about God. God is the one who knows all the secrets, and he can tell you. He told me, so I'm going to tell you. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be made known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. Right? So Daniel has pulled a Paul. If you were here this morning, right, pulled a Paul. Paul said, this idea, this gospel that I'm preaching, it's not of men, it's not of this, it's all from God, and God gave it to me, right? Jesus met me on the Damascus Road, and he changed my life, and now he's given me this message to preach to others. Same thing Daniel's saying, I have the vision, I have the interpretation, but it's not because of me, it's all because of God. God's given this to me. You saw, O king, verse 31, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and exceedingly brightness, stood before you, and appearance was frightening. Oh, I'm sorry, it's lost my place. The head of this image was a fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay or pottery. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them into pieces. Then the iron and the clay, the bronze and the silver and the gold, all together were broken in pieces and became like the chaff of a summer threshing floor. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. All right, so here Daniel goes in. He says, okay, here's your dream. You dreamt of this big guy, this big ugly guy, right? Here it is, right? This big statue. And in there's a boulder coming in, a big rock that's not been cut out. It's there, right? So this is what he's thinking. But notice a few things. If you can look at the chart, use your brain, thoughts, picture it in your head, whatever you want to do. For one, it's not a big chocolate bunny, but it's close, right? But notice a couple things, right? The quality of the materials declines from the head to the feet, right? It starts with the head of gold, and then the chest and arms of silver, and then on to bronze, then on to iron, and then on to clay pottery, right? So as the statue goes down, the qualities of the material go down. Also, the weight declines from head to feet, right? Gold is the lightest, and then you kind of it goes on, right? Pottery would be the lightest. And then also, metal increases in strength from head to feet. So even though weight goes down, the strength goes up. Okay, so this is kind of just some important things that we'll point out in a couple chapters later. But that's the dream. Nebuchadnezzar saw this big statue in his dream, and now Daniel tells him about this. This was the dream, verse 36. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. Notice the word we there, right? Now we. So even though this is all Daniel, God gave it to Daniel, he's being a good leader, right? He's pulling his team along, his friends, right? And now we will tell you. It's all about the team, right? Not about Daniel. You, O King, the King of Kings. Well, I thought that was Jesus, right? King of Kings, forever, forever. Right? Everybody sings that at Christmas, right? The King of Kings is what we would call Jesus. But when we see that in Scripture, we see it in Revelation. It's capital K, right? You kind of have that, the King of Kings. The King of Kings is a familiar word that's used several times throughout the Old Testament of several kings. It's just basically saying that King Nebuchadnezzar is physically, humanly, the king above all the kings. He has built his empire by his own hands, right? He's done this. He's literally killed other kings time and time again to take over his nation. So he is a king in the making. He did not inherit all of this. He was a part of that made his kingdom. So you, O King, the King of Kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, notice that, given the kingdom, the power and the might and the glory, and into whose hand he has given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of fields, and the birds of heavens, making you rule over them. You are the head of gold. Now, for those of you who are Disney fans, this is a little excerpt from Aladdin. Okay, let me explain this to you. He says, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the might, and the glory. In the movie Aladdin, right, there was a bad guy, his name was Jafar, right, and he wanted to be the most powerful sorcerer in the world. And so he kept asking the genie for this. Make me a wizard, make me a sorcerer, give me this, and it goes on. And then Aladdin uses a little trick, and he says, here's the deal. What's more powerful, you or the guy who gives you all the power? And Jafar, the bad guy, says, that's brilliant. He says, make me the most incredible genie of all times. Well, that's what he does. And he goes, live in space. You guys remember that? He gets sucked back into the little lamp, right? Okay, this is what Daniel's doing, right? O King of Kings, you are the King, O King, the King of Kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the might, and the glory, whose hand is above everybody, who rules over the birds and over the people. But notice, he's saying all this to the king, but what is he really saying? God is more powerful than King Nebuchadnezzar. The giver is always more powerful than the receiver. Okay, it always happens that way. And so that's what he's saying here. So he's kind of buttering the king up, but still being theologically correct, right? Because Daniel knows who God truly is. And so he's just kind of pulling a little Aladdin there. And so it kind of happens, right? You're the giver. The beasts of the fields, the birds of the air, making of the air. You are the head of gold. He's saying, King Nebuchadnezzar, you are the top of this dream. You are literally the face, the head of this statue. You are the gold part of this statue. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze shall rule over you. And so here, the king is seeing this statue. What does this really mean? Like, should I build this statue? What does this mean? Why is it all these different materials? And so what happens, Daniel says, you're the top. You are the top, Nebuchadnezzar. You're made of gold. But soon there's going to be another kingdom. And it's not going to be really bigger than your kingdom. But there's another kingdom coming. And that's the silver kingdom, right? And then after them, there's going to be another kingdom, who will be the biggest kingdom, and that's going to be the belly of bronze, right? It's going to be Greece, and we'll kind of get into that in just a moment. It'll be the Greek kingdom. So there's going to be these kingdoms. So what he couldn't understand, Daniel is saying, it's a timeline. It's a timeline. You're here now. You're at the top, but in a little bit there's going to be this, and a little bit there's going to be that, and it keeps going. Verse 40, and there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all of these. And as you saw, the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom, but some of the firmness of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with the soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. All right? Now, I know that means a whole lot, so let me kind of help you break it down there. So, right, so you have Babylon is the goal, right? And then after them is going to come the Medo-Persians, okay? So the Persians are going to come, and so you can see later on we'll see that come. It comes with Cyrus the Great in 539. And so it comes on. Persia was larger than Babylon, but they didn't have a big army. It was just kind of a fluke that they really took over. It's just kind of interesting. But I put it there in my note, in God's design, size is never the issue. It's always quality over quantity. And Babylon exceeded Persia in political organization, culture, life, and absolute authority of the king. Babylon was always the biggest, the best. If you take history today in any school, you read about Babylon, right? Because that's the Hanging Garden. You talk about the Alexandria Library. I mean, all these things that happen are going back to Babylon. Babylon was the greatest. It was the culture. It was the thing. But then here comes this kind of weird, short-lived culture come in, this country. The Persians, they come in. They're the second. Then you have the third, which is Greece, Alexander the Great. Most of you have probably heard of him. He invades Persia in 334. And he takes over and really expands the world to be as big as it ever has been. But he does it in 8 years. He dies 8 years later in a battle. And not even in a cool way. I mean, he just dies not even in a cool way. But we'll get more of this later on. And so after he dies, because he had no successor, his four generals, he had four main generals, his 4 5-star generals, they divided up this kingdom and they said, okay, you're going to go to the northwest, you're going to the northeast, you're going to the southwest, you're going to the southeast, and we'll live peaceably. Well, that lasted for about 1 day, and then they started fighting everybody. And so that's what happens. And then you have the 4th kingdom, which is the Roman Empire, 168 BC, conquers in, kind of takes over. And then you have the feet and toes. The feet and toes, which is really weird to say at church. I'm just saying, you talk preach about feet and toes, it's kind of gross, right? It is to me anyways. Feet and toes, when you talk about feet, you think about iron, right? You think about iron coming down, and then all of a sudden it turns into pottery. It's just really weird, right? You're kind of like, I've never seen anything like that. It's really weird. So you have this huge statue. Just think about this. Gold, silver, bronze, iron. I mean, super strong, monster statue. But at the very bottom, the thing that's holding it up is a clay pot. Have you ever bought a clay? If you live at my house and you buy a clay pot, I can assure you it will be broken time we get home, right? Because I'm NASCARing it up, and it's gonna be. If you look at a clay pot, it's like it just breaks. And you're like, oh, right? It happens, and so all this is depending on something that's so small. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, or shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in all pieces, and all these kingdoms bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that stone, okay, here's that stone coming in, hitting the feet and toes, right? Just as you saw that stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, it was by God's hand, okay? By God's hand. And that it broke into pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and gold. Right? You guys remember the 3 little pigs? Right? You remember that 3 little pigs? Oh yeah. It's very straw. It's all about the foundation, right? It's all about the foundation. You build with bricks, and they couldn't huff and puff and broke down. You can build the biggest, greatest thing in the world, but if your foundation wasn't good, it just takes out really easy. It's exactly what happened, right? They built it up, gets taken out really easy. But the stone that God carved out comes in, crashes the feet. A great God was made known to the king. What shall be after this? The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. And you're saying this is 100% true. I'm not lying to you. Then the king, Nebuchadnezzar, fell on his face and paid homage to Daniel. Right? So after the king heard this, he heard the dream. He knew that he saw the dream. Okay? He saw it like, oh my goodness, this is making sense. Everything that he's talking about is just kind of that wow moment. And so what happened? The king, he fell down. Daniel commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. And the king answered and said to Daniel, truly, your God is God of gods and Lord of kings. Okay? So notice this. He's not saying your God is the God above, of all gods. And he's just saying your God is God of, notice, lowercase g. You're Lord of lowercase k. What he's saying is, man, well, your God, the God that you worship, Daniel, is better than Marduk or Baal or, the things that we talked about last week. The little dragon thing off Mulan. What was his name? Mushu. Yeah, there you go. See, if you missed last week, you missed the good stuff. Why is everything going back to Disney? I got to pick out some illustrations. That's pictures. I don't know. I'll work on new movies next week. So he's right. So he's not saying, "Oh, God is the God of heavens." He's not accepting the Lord in salvation. He's not having faith in God. He's just saying, "Your God is more powerful than Marduk, right, and Mushu, and all these other gods that we're talking about, right?" The revealer of mysteries, and you've been able to reveal this mystery. Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over the wise men. Remember I said, he said, "I'm going to give you a great honor." And I said it was the stamp, the golden star. Just kind of, good job. Okay, he was so overwhelmed, he actually did give him a great honor. He actually gave him something. He made him ruler over the whole province. Just like Moses, right? Just like Joseph. We can see this, right? So God puts godly people in foreign countries and Gentile countries to help, not necessarily lead the country, which they do, but every time, what does Joseph do? What is Daniel going to do? He's going to use his position to help godly people in a foreign land, right? So he's going to do this. He's moving the Gentile nation forward, all the while loving on and bringing God's people up and encouraging them and keeping them safe. It made him chief prefect, basically made him over all of the people who did not die, right? The Magi, the sorcerers, the Egyptians, the pharmacists, all those people, right? Daniel made a request to the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel remained at the king's court. Notice, again, right? It wasn't Daniel. Daniel just wasn't, "I hold the golden scepter, I'm the best." He said, "Hey, can I bring my friends? Because we kind of did this together. They were praying for me." And King's like, "Absolutely," right? True leadership, truly godly standard. It's not about you. It's all about God and pulling God's people together. Now, I know for a lot of you, you have a lot more questions about this, and that's going to come in a couple weeks. We'll come back to it literally, I think, in like 3 weeks, because it's how Daniel's laid out. And we'll explain more about that and give you the timelines and the kings, and kind of those of you who love history, you'll love those lessons. Let me pray for us. Father, we love you. We thank you so much. We thank